Hi everybody! It's history time with Rosie and Alma.
Yes!
I feel like we need a theme tune.
We do.
Because they're getting more and more regular. People gave us encouraging comments and we are running with them.
Absolutely.
So
if one person likes the
I know.
idea, we're like, let's plan 3 more.
yeah. There are a few in the diary. And today we are talking about very, very early sewing.
Really back.
Really
the
far
furthest back we've been, I think. Yes.
Yeah, I think
big time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the earliest evidence of sewing and sort of sewing patterns or sewing shapes or
clothes.
fashions. Like when clothes were first worn and all that sort of stuff.
Which is obviously a huge subject,
Yes.
enormous, and as always, our disclaimer, we are absolutely not experts, although Rosie is a little bit more closer to this kind of research from what you actually studied, but more on that later. But we're not experts on the subject, we are enthusiasts.
100%.
And so we love to look into these subjects because we find them interesting. Some of you clearly find them interesting on that, which makes us really happy. And what we hope to do with these vlogs is spark some interest in you. So maybe you hear something and you're like, oh, I want to find out more about that one thing that Rosie said. We'll link to useful articles and things like that and papers below, so you can continue your research. Maybe it gives you an idea to look into something specific that makes sense to you. But yeah, it's all for the love of knowledge.
It is, and I think we generally give ourselves a topic and we each go very different way. We just follow what we're interested in.
It happens naturally. It's nice that.
Yeah. Very handy.
Yeah.
And like Alma was saying, this is very much up my street. Because I studied geography, but specifically I studied very, very old geography. So like your ice ages.
Oh, proper,
all Paleolithic stuff, archaeology.
So it's all linked.
Blah, that. Yeah, so I would look at the landscapes that were available in a very, very long time ago, and that would sit within the context of what animals were around at that time, what if there were people around, what were they doing, this, that and the other. I loved that stuff. And the kind of whole premise is that you look at the past landscape and you look at the past climate and you look at the way people reacted, and then you kind of put all that information together and you can help predict what's going on in the future. That's kind of the huge overarching goal. But of course in like academics, people get so specific. So you end up looking in very, very niche things. And obviously, people in that world have looked at sewing things.
I know. I was surprised at how much material I found on the subject.
Absolutely bonkers.
And it makes sense because what people wore and how the clothes were made is intrinsically connected to other aspects of a civilization. So how they lived, what materials they had around. Like it's of course it's important. What we wear is important.
Exactly. It's like we feel like it's important now because you're like, oh, I'm really confident when I wear this top.
Yes.
But actually there's so many things that give tells about society or tells about what people were doing at that time. And
it's fascinating. Really
obsessed with this one.
Yes. Yeah. So how did you start, like what did you pick to literally start looking into it? What did you think of searching for?
I searched for earliest evidence of sewing.
Amazing, okay.
And then it threw up a date, which was 61,000 years ago. And I was like, hello a second. This is sort of like the timescales that I used to work in. So then I was thinking about what I used to do, and a lot of that was about like ice ages when the world was plunged into ice and not. And then I was thinking about the context of that. So it's called the last glacial maximum. So the last biggest extent of ice in the world was between 21,000 and 12,000 years ago. Okay. So if you've got a sewing needle popping up in 61,000 years,
that's impressive.
The people have lived through, or like people following that have lived through times when ice covered most of the UK, most of Northern Europe, Scandinavia, all of Canada, a lot of Northern America. So there's a combination of climate, it being really, really cold, it being warm at certain points as well, and people migrating across the world, how are they doing that? Like, what are they using around them?
The ice? Basically, not necessarily.
It would
I would. Be like, get me somewhere else.
Get me back to Costa Rica, come on. More what it's tied into is the whole out of Africa thing.
Yeah.
In terms of like human evolution started in Africa.
Yes.
And people trying to understand how, not necessarily how, but why and what tools people had that helped them. Both like cognitively in their minds, or practically to help them get out and into the world as we know it.
Yeah.
And it turns out that sewing needles are a part of that story. Of sex.
I love that.
Had I have known that when I was
back
studying
in the day,
this,
were you sewing when you were sewing as much as you do now? Not as
just
much.
Towards the end, not as much, but that was when I started sewing.
Interesting.
But a lot
that
of
could
this
have
stuff,
been it could still be a PhD subject.
Is there time?
Who
Just a little cash PhD in the
cash
background.
PhD, right? This, I have to say, our little researchers do make me think, like, do I want to do like an evening course in history of fashion or something? Because I've done one before at weekends. I loved it. And it just gets
cash learning.
that part of like your brain gets tickled when we do this, which is really
does.
nice.
Yeah. If I could do it without, I want to say without any of the work.
Yeah.
If I could
Or
go
the
to
pressure.
lectures and just listen.
Divine.
And just be like, oh, that's cool.
That's interesting.
I don't want to write a paper about it, but I'll listen.
A film of love.
Exactly. So I found it so interesting because a lot of so basically sewing needles have been found at certain sites across the world.
Okay.
In different time periods, and a lot of the sites that came up, I was like, oh, I know that name. That's really cool, and I just found it personally interesting because it tied a lot of stuff together for my personal interests.
Yeah,
So
that's amazing.
But very exciting. So the first evidence that I came across was this cave in South Africa.
Okay.
Which was 61,000 years ago.
Wow.
Of a needle.
Made of
bone.
Bone. Okay, so it's a bone that's been like worked on to
Been
get that
worked
shape.
on. It's really sharp, and the main thing that made it significant from previous things that people have found is it's got that eye, the eye of the needle.
To put the thread
To put
through.
a thread through. And then the assumption is that people, whatever sort of species they were at the time, would use either bits of animal, delightful.
Tendons and
Tendons
stuff like that,
and things like that. Which,
Lovely.
ooh, how horrible, but how
springy though,
strong.
yeah. Very resistant.
Very like Mariflex.
Mariflex. The prehistoric Mariflex.
Exactly, they knew it. They knew it from the
That's
start.
fantastic. Mariflex, in case you don't know, it's a thread by some company.
But is it Gutermann?
Gutermann, maybe.
Yeah.
But basically, it has some elasticity to it, so you can sew in a straight stitch, but you get the stretchiness. So you can sew knits with a straight stitch. So
Yeah, much preferable to what they were using.
Tendons.
Or maybe bits of plant.
Yeah.
Have like strong bits of plant. Sometimes if you like peel back a stem, you can see that certain bits are so strong and like sinewy.
Yeah. Fun.
And the presumption was obviously that they'd be sewing hides together, animal hides, which is obviously makes sense.
And a byproduct of eating the animals, so it's all there.
Yeah, and if you think about how the climate is changing, and if at certain points it's getting a lot colder, but you're trying to explore and you're trying
Further.
to get maybe, I don't know, widen your territory or all of this sort of stuff. The practical thought of going, hang on a second, I should maybe cover myself up and we could go to colder places and we could still exist.
Yes.
Or like, we got this hide that's a blanket that I sleep under.
Why don't I just wear it
Just
out and
put it
about?
on me. Yeah, which I found fascinating.
That is very cool.
So before that there was the needle shape, but they were more like, I think it's pronounced owls, AWLS. You know, you kind of use them sometimes for marking.
Yeah.
So it just didn't have that eye.
So it just made the hole, and then you...
I guess you'd poke
with your
through.
fingers, maybe?
Yeah.
If the hole is big enough.
That's it. But then the finding the needles with the eye in it signifies quite a cognitive leap. To be like, hang on a second, we've been poking a hole and pushing it through, but why can't we have a tool that does the whole job? So, like, people finding that evidence of first needles is like also recognition that people's brains were changing.
Yes.
And that people's cognitive thought was like evolving.
That's
which
so cool.
is bonkers. And one thing I think we both came across.
I love this.
It's a fantastic byproduct of. That's why I love how all these things work together and how very clever people work these things out. It makes total sense. In that certain points in history, you've got all the years, and at all these archaeological sites, there were one type of lice that were found that are commonly known as head lice now.
Yeah.
And that was the only type that was found. And then all of a sudden, at these sites where you know where humans have been, that type of lice evolved into two types of lice. Ones that would have existed on clothes and hides, and then ones that would have existed on your head. And so despite an animal hide not being found in a cave, because that probably wouldn't last, it would just, over time...
that's how they know that they were wearing clothes.
Yeah.
That blew my mind, but I loved it when we were comparing notes. Like, I've got lice. Do you have lice?
I have
Yes. We don't have lice. So let's lice in our notes. But that's amazing, because natural fibres, as we know, disintegrate, deteriorate and disappear unless, there have been findings, of course, of clothing, and that's how we know things. But if generally they don't last very long.
No.
And that's why they can work out that people were wearing clothes even without finding the clothes. That blew my mind. I love it.
It's like all the pieces of the puzzle. That's what I really, really like. So obviously, we were beginning in sort of South Africa 60,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And then as we kind of go up closer and closer to modern day, you start to see more out of Africa.
Okay.
Up into sort of your Mongolias, all that sort of area, and China, Siberia, around 45,000 years, needles. Europe, 26,000 years, needles. North America, 13,000 years ago, needles. And they are really representing the spread of people. You can see a journey there.
That's cool.
Love.
And all made of bone? All along?
All made of bone.
Amazing.
Or basically animal material. Things, but that doesn't mean, it's fair to say, one of the little geeky phrases is that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
No,
so it doesn't mean they weren't making them out of, I don't know, a bit of tree. But
that would be great. Yeah, that's the thing.
But bone is what we have.
Bone is what we have.
And obviously it works. I guess bone, when you see a broken bone or something, it splinters off in quite...
Yes.
It gives you that needle piece and it's sharp.
Yes, that's
true.
I
mean, it makes sense.
It just makes sense to use that.
But then the next kind of bit that I came across, which blew my mind even more, was in China about 10,000 years ago. I'm trying to think whether it was... So that was just when the ice was going back up. You're getting closer. It was on the way to warming to what we have now.
Okay.
So it's getting a bit warmer and warmer, but people are moving about. You start to see different needle types. So before that, we've just basically had, you got a needle, you're doing some sewing.
Yeah.
But then, they started to identify in these younger sites different needle types. So you might have a big chunky one for sewing your big chunky things together. But they also found really delicate ones. The only thing I'm going to say in that day and age that you're going to use delicate ones for, they're not going to be sewing viscoses or silks.
No.
But they might be doing embroidery or decoration.
Oh, okay, fair.
So it's suddenly like, this has an aesthetic purpose.
That's interesting.
Rather than just we need to put these clothes on our body
together,
purpose to keep warm.
It's not just practical. And usually, decoration usually also goes hand in hand with religious kind of rituals and things like that, and offerings to the gods and things like that.
Any sort of iconography, any sort of recognition of like a different, I don't know if like tribal's the right word, different groups of people. And that I found mad that all of a sudden you're recognising that people aren't making clothes just for practical reasons. And again, it just really strongly denotes a change in people's brains.
Yes.
Obviously, it might go hand in hand. Well, actually, now I'm thinking what it would be nice to look at is that, and I don't know, history of artwork. When you got your artwork in the caves, what sort of time is that?
I know,
this reminds me.
My Anderson blouse has basically cave paintings of horses, hence me wearing it today.
That's it. Yeah, like I guess because it's in that vein of thought of like when people start thinking about I want to make pretty things, or it's storytelling as well. People used to like tapestries. It's the beginning of that.
Of course,
maybe it's
tapestries are storytelling.
Yeah,
but I do think often the prettiness comes in hand with the religious rituals.
And that's amazing. What on earth were they thinking at that? We're still talking 10,000 years ago. So, we've not got organised religion. But they might have their own something that then if it's like the sun or the moon.
It is, exactly. Some kind of divinity that's being worshipped. And I do think that there's a lot of dressing yourself nice for the divinity, basically. That's what I found a lot in South America, for example, and things like that. A lot of textiles were related to the fact that the textiles were pretty and colourful and embroidered. It was to do with going to the temple and offering your art, basically, to the divinity, which is interesting. And so it wasn't so much like I want to look good in the clothes.
No. But you want to, it's something that says something.
I'm worthy of attention from gods or something like that, along those lines.
I was wondering as well whether, this is just me making things up, but whether it could be like, hey, I went out and got that mammoth,
and I'm going to wear it with pride.
I'm going to put something on my thing that says that, and maybe you've got the big hunter of the group is covered with stuff.
Yes.
Because he's like the big man. And then it's all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a hierarchy, because that guy's got 5 stars on him and he's only got 2 or
that's
whatever.
So true. And clothing does kind of instantly give you this person has more than that person, sadly, but and like this is completely different times, but like in lots of monarchies the crown kind of decides what you can and cannot wear. Like there's a thing, I don't know, Back to our pal, I know. Louis XIV. But so in France he decided what fabrics people could wear. Often it was just like, you have to wear French fabric, which fair enough. Like, okay, it's for the economy. But like, I was watching something, I can't remember what TV show, but they said that in China, only the royal family wears yellow. And so you're not going to be allowed to wear yellow. In Italy, only the kind of nobility could wear purple, or only the church could wear purple at one point, like all of these things. So who's to say that it didn't start back in the day? And it might be related to, I'm the strongest alpha male, I've killed more bisons than you. I get to wear the horns on me and you don't. And that's instantly like, okay, big man, I'm just going to listen to what he says.
That's it. You can see. I think you can see the parallels all the way through the years.
Yeah.
It's just the same old.
Fun.
But I think I found that fascinating. That link between realizing what people might be using clothing for that wasn't just practical, just because there's different types of needles, and of course it totally made sense of like, what have I have the sewing tools in my sewing box. For what I do, and an archaeologist could open that up and be like, oh, she usually uses lightweight fabrics or this, that, and the other.
She's got microtex needles.
Exactly, But I don't have a big darning needle, so I'm not doing any darning, and it's like a very simplified version.
No, I love that. I love
it. It makes so much sense.
It makes sense what you can deduce from the tools.
That's it. And one of the big archaeological questions to think you mentioned is like, how and why did we all move out of Africa into the wider world, and sort of what facilitated that movement. And the most sophisticated evidence in these really, really old sites, obviously pre sort of a lot of organisation and stuff like that, the most sophisticated needles and sewing equipment were found in North American sites, and they were for people that travelled the furthest.
Wow.
So there's a sort of link in, even though people would have been, if you think of like the flip side, people would have been in closer sites, but they didn't have the sophisticated stuff the people that had travelled all the way to North America did.
Okay.
So it's not like it just got better over time and everyone at that time period had the same.
What were they doing?
Yeah, the people that were able to travel the furthest had the best stuff. Which comes first, I don't know. Whether they travelled and they learnt more, or whether they travelled further because they learnt more in the first place. That's, I find, really interesting.
Well, this probably ties in with something that I found, that I was reading about, that the development from just wearing a fur of an animal and making clothes of some sort went hand in hand with the development of tools. So you needed to have the technology or know-how to create a very sharp stone, for example, to cut shapes from the fur or leather. So you're not just going with what shape you've got something that cuts around. And also developing the eyed needle for sewing that Rosie already talked about. So these two things go hand in hand, and this, it just made me laugh a lot when I found because so in this article it said that this development of tools, etc., was done by Cro-Magnons, the species, who migrated to Europe around 35,000 years from Africa. 35,000 years ago. Now, the Neanderthal occupied the same region, but became extinct in part because they could not make fitted garments, but draped themselves with crudely cut skins, and based upon their simple stone tools, which did not provide the warmth needed to survive as the climate grew colder in the last glacial period. Ties in, but I just love this, like, you can't make fitted garments. Sorry, extinct. This is what we mean when we talk about taking the time to fit the better dress.
If I didn't even know Neanderthals to make toiles.
Honestly, do a toile, guys. It just made me laugh. It's sad. It's about extinction, of course. But it made me laugh that, like, one of the reasons was that they couldn't make good enough clothing to travel and survive. And so I read a lot about the fact that yes, the furs and the leathers would keep you very warm, but because they weren't cut into shapes that fit the body properly, moving in them was actually quite hard, heavy, very heavy. So you're not going to walk for days and days and days. It's very heavy, and then if you do get hot, it's all or nothing. You don't have anything else underneath. It's just the fur. So the development of more sophisticated clothing meant that they could travel further away. So the guys that ended up in North America, that you were talking about, probably had figured out layers, is my guessing.
That's what it is. And because people at that point weren't, there was no agriculture, you weren't sitting and staying in one place.
You were finding.
You were following the food and exploring, and they had to move. And they had competition. You had the Cro-Magnons coming up and like, hey guys.
We got tools, we got fitted garments.
Interesting. People dismiss sewing as like
honestly,
a little thing.
A little domestic thing. It's survival of the species, literally. It made me happy. Honestly. That was so interesting to me, just to see how actually fundamental it was, the development of clothing.
Well, a quote I've got that someone wrote, that we'll link below, it says, "Being able to sew warm garments may have opened up the door to the new world." I mean, that's everything.
That is everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
But then I think you have moved on a little bit. If you've got a couple more things.
I moved quite ahead. So I found this out, and this is why I love the little research, because, I looked at what's the oldest piece of woven clothing, garment, that we know of. And I found this lovely little V-neck number that I'm going to put a picture of. Lovely little shirt, dress. But this is what I love, is that I found out that it's in London.
Oh, nice.
It's in a museum in London.
See it.
We should go see it, because it really surprised me, because it's called the Tarkan dress. It's an Egyptian piece of clothing. That's believed to be made. This is all done through carbon dating and all the lice dating, those things that we were talking about. But it's from around 3,400 3,400 BC. So
Okay.
still a lot of time
Like
has passed, but
5,000
not
years
as
ago.
not as far as yours. But basically, the Tarkan dress is in the UCL Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology. It's in
Nice.
Houston. Never knew it existed. I now want to go because it has the oldest known woven garment, and it's amazing. Like, it's actually a pattern because it is very simple, but it's made from a front to back and sleeves. It has a V-neck, which I thought was quite advanced actually. That wouldn't be my first try. I know it's not the first garment; it's the first found garment.
Yeah, but I guess that's thinking about like how you put something on.
Yeah,
because it's not a tabard.
No, it's not a tabard. It's sewn.
You've got proper
it's
shapes.
sewn at the shoulders and it's sewn at the sides. Like, that's impressive. And it is made from linen. So this is something I found, is that most of the oldest garments that have been found have been made of linen.
Right.
So that was readily available.
Yeah.
And lots of thread was made from linen as well.
Okay.
Like flax.
Flax. Yeah,
Flaxseed, yeah. And so linen was what was very prominent in Africa and in Europe garments that have been found. Cotton and silk were so exotic, like
that's
really
mad
exotic.
cotton, isn't
I
it?
know,
Think
cotton, mad. And I then read, I jumped around a lot, but Rosie's covered a lot of things already chronologically, so I'm just going to put in a few more extras. I then looked at ancient Greece, and I thought, of course, what we think of in ancient Greece is the toga, so it's basically just draping. It's not patterns, it's draping. And I just don't think I'd thought about it. But of course it makes sense that what happened was that civilizations developed the loom technology, different types of looms in different types of areas in the world. But looms were developed, and basically whatever width the loom was, you made a big long piece in that width, and some were really, really wide. Like, I found some could be like up to like 2 meters wide, which shocked me because like even now it's hard to find a fabric that's 2 meters wide. I'm like, I don't want that.
Like, oh damn it, it's only 110.
Exactly.
I can't make this dress.
Exactly that. And so they basically just wove with linen, mainly also wool in Greece, and wove a big long piece, and then they got clever at ways of tying it together or pinning it together. With brooches, jewellery and stuff like that, but there was no closures. It was all kind of held together, all tied in. And the kind of more fitted, more developed, not fitted is wrong because it still would have been very roomy, but like more...
Less just like...
Less draped, more sewn things were tunics. So we're talking about, front and back and a head hole and armholes. And held together with a belt and jewelry and all of that. And then you start finding pieces with sleeves, which is just an extra piece and stuff like that. But I do think in terms of Greece, most of what's known is actually from paintings and amphoras, decorations, and vases and things like that. It's not that it's been found because it was linen and wool, and that just just disappears. Basically, it's not polyester. But so that's what's been gathered from that kind of documentation. And then the idea that people mostly wore garments made of wool and linen is gathered from trading books. So like commercial stuff.
Yeah,
because
they have records.
They have records of who's bought what, and then every now and then a really rich household, you would see that they buy a very small quantity of silk that came from Asia, or of cotton that I'm not sure where it came from. But I know that South America was making cotton, but obviously not. That's not getting to Greece. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where it came from, but there you go. Silk from China mainly, and you can see again. It's not that they found pieces, but they found selling and buying.
Like
financial records of things being traded, which is so interesting.
Do you know? I don't know if you've. In my head, when I think about like TV programs that maybe set in recent times and stuff,
Yes.
you'd have the rich people and they'd have like big drapes of everything around, and then you'd have maybe their servants or
It's a
whatever,
sack.
and they'd be but then in my head that means that the lower classes are wearing the pieces that are sewn.
That's
and
true,
the
because it's
upper
less
classes
fabric.
are just like
Oh, just drape it all. I think you're right there.
Maybe it is. It's
Because it's more economical to have a sewn piece than it is to spend on like a whole loom's worth of
like
linen.
Again, taking liberties.
Yeah.
But possibly it's sort of like, oh, it's the first instances you start to see of sewing being like, oh, it's a domestic thing.
Yeah, maybe.
It's not a
Ooh,
valued thing.
This is something that we're going to research after.
Yeah.
We should go to as well. But I'm thinking, no, that's very, very possible. And also, like, maybe thinking of what if, like, the lady of the manor is done with this particular fabric. It's a bit worn, and she just throws it down towards the kind of servants / slaves, and they sadly, and they go like, oh, we can get 4 tunics out of this.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's like, yes, bring it on. That makes complete sense to me. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that a lot. I'm trying to think. Oh, most of ancient clothes making was definitely dresses, togas, skirts for all genders, and cloaks for all genders. And it's not until like the Iron Age that we get the a first trouser, which I still thought it was quite early. I thought it would be way later on. But interestingly, trousers were developed for protection. So you've got your individual legs wrapped up in something, protecting from the environment. I don't know if we're thinking of like walking through the woods or whatever, or insects, protection from insects and warmth and stuff like that. But it was a very practical thing. Is like, and they were trousers, loose trousers with like really low crotches is what we're talking about. But it came from protecting your legs, which I thought was very interesting.
So if that happened to happen, then I think we all would have been just comfortable in skirts and dresses.
Exactly. And many cultures still are.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. But I think it's interesting to know that it's to do with the simplicity of the pattern, because trousers are much harder than a skirt. So
we all know that.
We all know that. And fitting trousers, hard, so low crotch, one size fits all. Like
probably
one
like a
design
drawstring
fits all.
or
Exactly, for sure.
Yeah.
Still tying and things.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's interesting to, like, everything makes sense.
Yes.
What came first, basically.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So draping came first because you don't have to really think about it much, and you don't have to have this skill of sewing.
No.
You just
but then it's
tie
a style. It gives a dramatic. It gives an effect of some sort of effect without having to have all that skill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a bit like. Sounds mean. I'm just thinking of like Project Runway.
Yeah.
There's often like, fashion designers that are just like doing this, and I'm like, you can't sew a seam. That's
I know.
fine. I just know it.
When they can't use a sewing machine.
I know.
They're out in my
But they try to like distract you with the draping of a beautiful silk. I'm like, but. But yeah, so it makes sense that draping came before sewing, that dresses, skirts came before trousers.
Yeah.
And it makes sense what materials were used where because of what was around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do wonder, I don't know, I didn't find out because I hadn't read the thing about sewing with tendons.
Yeah.
I wonder when they moved on from tendons to, let's try and make thread, weave thread.
That kind of jumped from hides. I mean, you kind of mentioned that they mostly went for like linens.
Yeah.
Or like, I guess the invention of weaving is a whole thing in itself.
Weaving is a whole thing in itself, big time.
But I guess it would be animal thread into real thread into, hang on a second, if we put all these threads together, that'll make fabric.
Yes. That's it.
That jump would
I
be very
did read.
interesting.
That thread came first.
Yeah.
And again, how they found.
I don't know.
There's
How do you work that out?
I don't know. But most of, from what I read, most of the clothing that has been recovered from like ages ago, it's usually in burial sites.
Yes.
Because somehow the clay that they're buried, like the earth, the soil that they're buried in had a clay that somehow preserved things.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's rare. So yeah, there's a lot of investigating that needs to be done around findings to deduce what people were doing and using and wearing.
It's the whole picture.
It's the whole picture,
Which
but it's so fascinating. But yes, the Talcan dress in London at the Petrie Museum. I don't know how to say it, but we should go. Just amazing that like the oldest woven garment is ready for us to be seen in London.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't expect it to. I wouldn't expect it to be in London, but then again, lots of Egyptian stuff in London. So
Load of stolen things.
Loads of stolen things. But yeah, interesting. It would be
Really
interesting to go and see it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of, well, the V&A has a lot on the history of kind of costuming and clothing.
Yes.
So that might have a little section that I haven't explored, because I always look at the pretty kind of, don't know, Renaissance things onwards. And like, up to the Middle Ages, a bit boring. I'm talking European fashion. But not now. I kind of want to go back and have a look if they've got any early clothing, which they must do. I'm sure.
Yeah. I think they'd have something, or they'll have some sort of work on it.
Yes.
It is, like we said, it's that preservation thing, isn't it? Which is so. And obviously, in the early sites, people weren't even writing anything down.
No.
Or
so
recording anything. But it's meant that you can still logically work out what is going on.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of end on basically a thing that the process of both making a needle and sewing stuff was such a big complex thought and cognitive thing I guess it's with any tools that you find. It's just such a recognition that people went through that thought process, thought ahead to making something. When they're making this needle, they weren't just making a needle, they were making a needle because they knew they wanted to use a bit of animal
thread,
something to sew something together, to wear something, to be warmer, to travel the world,
further,
to evolve to be Egyptians, to make the first fitted garment. And
that ends up in a London museum.
Yeah. I genuinely didn't think it would be as important.
No, same.
In like the academic world as it was.
It's
I'm really pleased about that.
I know. It's really cool. Yeah, that sentence of like the Neanderthals wouldn't have been extinct.
Us guys.
Had they known how to sew. It's very cool.
We'd be fine.
We'd be fine.
Yeah.
we would have been Cro-Magnons, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Helping to develop the sewing.
Hey guys, we've got this thing called Stitch School.
Just like 4 people.
Yeah.
This is Stitch School.
We're just saying hi together.
I love it. Oh, and if you look at the colour of this hide, it goes really nicely with the colour of this hide. Yeah. Why don't you pair them together and make a full set? Okay, on that note,
we have got some more history vlogs in the offing.
Yes.
Think different types of fabric.
Yes, we're focusing on fabric like categories.
Yes.
Next.
Yeah.
Not for a while, but they're they're in the diary, so they're happening.
Don't worry, history fans.
Oh yeah.
But otherwise, we will be back with more team makes.
Yes.
New pattern.
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah.
We will be at the Stitch Festival.
Yes.
In London. If anyone's in London, come do the Stitch Festival and the museum at UCL at the same day.
Oh my god, yes, that's near. Because the Stitch Festival's in Angel and the museum's in Euston. You can totally do that in one day. Oh, and then let us know how it was. The Talcan dress. I'm going to write it down on the screen because, yeah, very cool. Right, if you enjoyed this video, if you're one of our geeky friends that enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel for lots of content coming up, and we'll also link below to the whole history playlist because there's a few now.
Oh yeah.
And we'll see you again very, very soon. Bye.
Bye.